Hello everyone from Legoland, Malaysia. I'm here with the legendary Arnaud Bertrand. And no, we're not here on a date. We're here with our families, right?
It's okay, we can tell them Daniel society is much more progressive now.
That is true, that is true. But we have gotten together with our families so many times, and we've never done a video together. So I thought it would be great, especially because if we compare the time when we first met, when we were driving through Yunnan to now, you've kind of exploded on Twitter, or on X as it now. You're a bit of a thread master. You have these epic threads. That would be a really good wrestling name for you, by the way, Threadmaster X. You should definitely go with that. But maybe let's talk about how you got into that, how it started, basically how you got to where you are now on Twitter with some pretty influential people following you as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I started not that long ago, actually, maybe about 1 year before we first met.
Yeah.
So roughly 4 years ago. And I mean, the reason is quite simple. It's because by that point I had been living in China for 4 or 5 years, and I was just, very annoyed at the way China was portrayed in the media, which to me was obvious. Living there, seeing reality on the ground on a daily basis, it was obvious. It had no relationship with the China I was seeing
Right.
with my own eyes, and very few people. I mean, you were one of them. Actually, at the time, you were a big inspiration for me to get me started.
Oh, wow.
But there weren't many people out there who had the courage to say it like it is, like go on Twitter and publicly say, no, actually, the real China is not that sort of dystopian nightmare that's typically portrayed. Quite the contrary, actually.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, that's maybe something we can talk about in a second in regards to why there aren't many people who speak out, even if they can actually see the truth,
Yeah.
because there is an interesting dynamic to that. But before we get to that, I just want to know, I mean, I look at your threads, I look at the information you put out. I know we were talking earlier, and you're like, it's something that comes naturally to you, and you don't understand why, people see it as so special. But the level of detail and the quantity that you put out, and the quality also is remarkable. And I want to know what goes into that. Like, how much are you reading? What are you reading? How are you getting this level of detail, analysis, and finding things that nobody else is finding?
I mean, again, I don't think there is anything special, really. I have my routine every morning, where when I take my coffee and on breakfast, I just catch up on the news.
Yeah.
I always check the same stuff, which are, I typically check Western media, like the big names. I check South China Morning Post.
Okay.
I check Reddit a bit, especially the Sino subreddit, which has quite a few interesting stuff on China. Chinese social media sometimes, and that's about it. And when there is an information that jumps out to me as interesting, I just tweet about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to go back to what you said, you don't know why people find it interesting. I mean, I can talk from my perspective. It's not only a level of the detail that you go in and the analysis you put into it, but you're finding stuff that I'm seeing for the first time on your feed. So obviously, the culmination of all the different places you look at and you use as your research is producing some pretty good results. And then what about reading, like books and stuff like that? Are you reading a lot, or?
I read a lot, and maybe that's why I'm quite. I don't want to sound presumptuous, but quite good at finding out things that stand out, is because I just read so much. I read maybe on average one book a week, on top of all the,
One a week?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah. On top of all of this, regular online reading.
Yeah. So I think that's why I'm able. I just read so much. I'm able to see the type of stuff that stands out, because I sort of have a good overview of what's out there, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And what are you reading now?
Right now, I'm reading a bit randomly a book on cell biology, explaining the more like a science book on cells.
I don't think this is going to help your Twitter geopolitical Twitter threads.
No, I read surprisingly few geopolitical books. I tend to read more science books or fiction, a lot of historical biographies.
But
You
the
know, more,
microbiology specifically, is that just kind of fits in other personal interests that don't
yeah,
necessarily make it into content on
yeah,
X?
I'm interested in science. Actually, we have this tradition in our home where every night at the dinner table we speak about a science topic with my daughter,
Okay.
my daughters, and so I need to keep up
Yeah.
with the latest science news if I want to have interesting stuff to discuss at the dinner table.
Right, right. Oh, that's an interesting way to also develop the curiosity of your children as well.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
exactly, yeah.
So, did you used to post on anything else other than X and Twitter beforehand? Like, did hone your art somewhere else first, or Twitter was the first thing?
Yeah, I used to be quite to post quite a bit on Reddit.
Okay.
It used to be my social network of choice before X, and I think that actually did help me with X because on Reddit, the concept is everyone is anonymous,
Oh, right.
and so people are much more argumentative.
Okay.
And I think you need to have better arguments than on X in order to convince people or make your case. And so I used Reddit for I don't know, maybe 2-3 years, and I guess I got pretty good at argumenting with people online with that. And then when I posted on X, I could sort of preempt all the counter arguments that people will have because I was so used to that very hostile environment on Reddit, if that makes sense.
Right. So, what is it that makes Reddit different? Is it just that it's more about the argument than the personalities, and then whereas on X, personality plays more of a role than it would on Reddit? Or like, what's the difference? Do you think?
I think so. I think that on X, because I'm there with my real name,
Yeah.
I have a lot of following. People are much more wary of getting into personal fights with me, especially when you start to have a big following, because they know that my followers will then come and sort of defend me. Whereas that's not the case at all on Reddit, where it's you're anonymous, no one knows who you are, so it's purely based on what you write.
Right, yeah, we got a train coming by here. There we go. But yeah, so for people who don't know, give us an example of some of the really big names that either follow you or that interact with you.
I mean, I have Jared Kushner, weirdly, that follows me. Just 2 days ago, I had General Flynn, who replied to me, the former National Security Advisor. A few, prime ministers or ex-prime ministers or diplomats. It's quite varied. I tend to have more people following me, like personalities following me from the right or the alt-right, strangely enough, because I myself tend to be more on the left.
Yeah.
But I think the landscape in the West is that people who are on the left tend to be. There are two kinds of left. There is the like sort of social democrats, liberal left, which really drinks the Kool-Aid on everything.
Yeah,
And
like they were with Biden right until the last day, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Ironically, pro-imperialism. Yeah.
Exactly. And you have a small, in most countries, very, very small, much more left, like the real left. Genuine, like Mélenchon in France or, Corbyn in the UK.
Yeah.
I don't think it exists in the US even.
Not much.
What's his name? Sanders, I don't think.
I mean, he's like, when you really look at it, he still falls in line with the establishment when needed, when the what hits the fan.
So I don't see him like that at all. Whereas on the right, there is a much bigger community of people who understand that they're lied to on a lot of topics and are much more open to alternative ways of seeing the world. And that's why, sort of paradoxically, even though I tend to be much more left-leaning, I have more people from the right-hand side of the political spectrum following me.
Yeah, I wonder if part of it is because for the last few years, the right has been more of a victim of kind of censorship or control when you look at Facebook and you look at all these platforms. So they are perhaps a little bit more open-minded to hearing something different about China that isn't kind of supported by their mainstream media, because they've lost trust in their mainstream media more than the left has. Maybe that's changing a little bit with the Israel-Gaza situation, but they have been kind of on the losing end of mainstream media for longer.
And I also think there is a sociological aspect. I've noticed that highly educated people, tend to be successful, and because they are successful, they buy much more into the system, because obviously it works for them, right? And they tend to be more on the left. When you look, people voting on the right, voting for Trump, is very different from what it was 10, 20 years ago when Republicans were the party of the rich. Now it tends and the educated. I mean, people who wanted the system to stay the way it was. That's not the case anymore. It's the poor in America, those who want dramatic change, vote for Trump, and not for the Democrats.
Right. Yeah. So, including aside from that shift, I'm sure you've noticed as well too. There's been a shift with our content online in terms of when you post it. You used to have in 2019, 2020, when you'd say, "Oh no, you guys are wrong on China," and you'd correct it with evidence, you would get a lot more hate, pushback, a lot more trolls or whatever it is. I feel like that's died down a lot. And I don't know if you've noticed the same thing and have any theories as to why.
Yes, of course I've noticed. I think COVID played a big role. I think it opened a lot of people's eyes in a lot of ways, where like we were just saying, they realized that they were being gaslighted or lied to by the mainstream media on COVID, and therefore they sort of extrapolate that to okay, maybe they're lying to us on pretty much everything. And so since COVID, I think there is much more openness to alternative views, I think. And also the fact that China had a lot of success in many things. I mean, they're seeing the EVs coming up. They're seeing China becoming the top scientific power now, according to even The Economist agrees with that. So they're starting to tell themselves, wait a minute, we've been told the China collapse narrative for 20 years, but that's definitely not what's happening. We've been told that it's that dystopian nightmare where people's every move are controlled, but they're clearly very innovative, which is completely contradictory with being controlled. So something is not making sense here.
Yeah, and I guess, China, we've talked about this before, isn't really good at telling their story, but after a certain period of time, I mean, the facts will speak for themselves. And you even look at, for example, the president, is it president or prime minister of Argentina, Milei. Before he was elected, he said, we got to cut off all ties with China, we're not dealing with them, and they had some pretty harsh words for China. But, whatever it was a couple months ago, he said, oh, you know what? We need to do more business with China. They buy our stuff, and there's no conditions. That's it. They just buy our stuff, which is in stark contrast to a lot of Western countries. There's a lot of strings attached. Exactly. So even he recognizes that. So I think there is a big shift. Now, why is it, back to our original topic in the beginning, why is it that there more so before than now, there aren't more people speaking out for China, because we also know other people who are on board with saying, you know what, the narrative we get on China is completely false, but they don't want to speak up about it. So what's going on there?
So this is also a topic where people's perceptions are extremely wrong, like the complete opposite of reality. In fact, the truth is that when you speak out in favor of China, there is literally nothing in it for you, and you lose much more than you gain, because I mean, no one is paying me, right? The only...
That's what everybody says. That's what they go for. They say, CCP, agents of the CCP, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the typical narrative. But yeah, the CCP doesn't pay anyone, actually. I mean, they have like think tanks and stuff like that, but you know, no one is paying me for tweeting. The only income I get for doing it is from Twitter itself, which is you know, almost close to nothing. Twitter ads pay very little, and so the point is that people who can afford to do it tend to be the people like us. Actually, we have a very similar profile. In the sense that we're both financially independent. Right. We did well, right? And so we can we have no employer. We can do whatever we want. We can't be cancelled. There is no one. We have no ties, and so that's why we can do that. Like there is no risk for us. Whereas you know, someone who is in a job, let's say with a Western company, and who starts speaking positively about China, he very likely will have you know, a mob going after him. That employee from that company is you know, saying positive things about communism. That's unacceptable, and then he's going to be fired. And,
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you even look at, you know about my interview with the CBC, Canadian State Broadcaster, where they interviewed me for half an hour, and I spent the whole time making sure I very carefully answered every question so that they couldn't cut it out of context. The final result was they used 3.5 seconds to make it sound like I said something I didn't. And when I complained to the ombudsman, they said, oh, you know what? Because they couldn't deny it. They said, yeah, it makes it look like you said something completely that you didn't. We'll put a note on our corrections page, but the damage is done. If I was actually working in Canada or doing business in Canada and somebody Googled my name, that's what would come up. So these are the mechanism in place to stop people from speaking up and speaking out.
Exactly.
But with that in mind, because you're right. I mean, even I mean, I've done some trips with like CCTV, for example. I went to Tibet a few years ago. All they did was pay for the travel, and I spent, I think it was 4 weeks or something like that, a long time. And same with, I went to Xinjiang, and even when I wanted the video to post, to make my own cuts, they had 8 terabytes of video that I needed, and I asked them, do you think, you know, there's budget anywhere where you guys can buy me a hard drive? And they're like, no, I had to pay 4,000 RMB for my own hard drive to get the content from this. So you're right, we go through a lot more expense. And on that topic, I don't know how it works at home with you, but it kind of annoys my wife at times. She's like, you know what, you're spending way too much time on this. What are you doing? You know, focus more on at home or whatever it is. So exactly. What about for you?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. And that's actually a personal struggle. Since I get nothing out of Twitter, you know, I'm constantly in an argument with myself and with my wife for tweeting too much. So that's the reality. So it's the complete opposite from the, you know, you're just paid to tweet all day long. It's the exact inverse. My struggle on a daily basis is how do I not tweet all day long so I do something actually productive for myself, more productive.
Yeah, for sure. You know, we were talking a little bit about people who turn negative on China, and we identified a few people who have different personal stories, whether they, you know, had a business deal that went bad in China, or they, you know, had a Chinese partner and then ended up breaking up, and it was a bad breakup, and then they take it out on China. And we were talking about that last night over a couple of whiskeys, and I was saying that I would think that if something happened to me in China, I was wronged, I don't think, and I know this is easy to say when you're not in that situation, I don't think that would turn me anti-China, because one of the things that drives me is I see China's rise as a positive force on the world. Just like the leader of Argentina found out, And just like a lot of these other global south countries are finding out, that they have this new partner that they can deal with that often leaves productive assets on the ground.
Yeah.
So that's what kind of drives me. You know, it doesn't matter what happens to me personally in China, I see the positive effect on the world. That is a major element for me. So what is it that drives you? Like, what is it that keeps you going and saying, no, I gotta keep spreading this message and basically straightening the facts out?
I think at heart is still the same feeling that I had when I started tweeting, which is the injustice of it. Like I see a country that has gone through a very, very hard time, like the century of humiliation and so on, where you know, people were poorer than the poorest country in Africa, that is doing incredibly hard work to rise back up. And you know, people are. It's not a story of people being like enslaved to do that. It's people genuinely want their country to go back up, and that makes complete sense. Like why wouldn't they? And the constant bashing and you know, dirtying of China just outrages me, especially given that the situation where we put them, where it was, is in large part due to colonialism.
And you have these same powers that had China under the thumb of colonialism, now lecturing China.
Exactly.
You know, on false pretenses, no less.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, even if they were correct reasons, it still is a little bit rich for them to be coming to the table. The fact that they have to come up with falsehoods makes it that much more outrageous, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that's truly what drives me. It's not driven by me, my personal story with China, but more that principle, I guess. Of course, my personal story as a place, because both my daughters, like your kids as well, are mixed. So they're half Chinese, half French. And I want them to live in a world where both their countries, both their cultures are, you know, get an equal amount of respect. Because I will find it extremely unhealthy for them to, you know, feel, you know, somehow ashamed that as the media is telling them to be of their Chinese, you know, the Chinese part of their identity. There's nothing to be ashamed of. So
yeah, you want them to know that both parts of their identity, there are things to be proud of. And even being full Chinese, I've had a lot of people who are overseas Chinese who reached out to me to thank me for posting my videos because they themselves were feeling ashamed or feeling that China was everything the mainstream media was saying. And then finally, when these alternative voices came out, it made them realize, you know what, no, I can be proud of my country. And so that's...
Actually, I don't want to tell his name, but I had a very successful Silicon Valley entrepreneur who created one of the biggest brands tell me exactly that, because he's Chinese diaspora, and he used to buy into the narrative, and now he doesn't anymore, thanks to, well, partially me. And I think they feel it, where it's.
That must be one of the other things that drives you too. I mean, when you hear stories like that, and you hear that your content is actually making a difference, I mean, how can that not encourage you to keep going?
Yeah, it does make a difference. And I also get, you know, annoyed when I meet people who should know better, who just, you know, buy into the whole narrative, and that drives me as well. Where, like, how come you haven't looked into this a bit more? And that's what I try to do, because some of this stuff is like, let me give you an example. Like just 3 nights ago, I was speaking with a Chinese girl, a friend of my wife, grew up in Beijing, and we were speaking about China during COVID. And I was there during the whole time, and she wasn't. And she was under the impression that China, the entirety of China was locked down during the whole time.
And you couldn't do anything the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, I mean, we traveled together.
That's when we traveled first together in Yunnan.
Yeah, in an RV trip during zero COVID, and I did so many trips in China. I mean, I visited maybe half of China during that time. Like zero COVID meant there was zero COVID. Like there was no COVID, you could travel everywhere in the country.
Right.
And she, a Chinese citizen who grew up in China, she had family there still, didn't know that. Like that blows my mind. Like how come? So yeah, it's that also motivates me. Like I find it crazy that the Western propaganda is so powerful, and there is no one that gives gives so few people that give an alternative truth.
We were talking about that yesterday too, on how we say that Western propaganda is powerful, but when you really understand it and you look at it, so much of it is so simple. You wonder how can people possibly believe it, but it seems like it's an underlying foundation that sets that up. Like whether it be through movies, through use of words, or the way that people are, the way that they grow up as well. It takes that foundation in order to get to a point where the most silly propaganda works, where you can say to somebody who was even born in China, who's a Chinese citizen, you couldn't move around at all in China for all of COVID-0, and they believe it. There's something that goes into that beforehand.
I don't know if you watched that interview between Chomsky and that BBC reporter. I can't remember his name.
It's an old clip, right?
Yeah, an old clip where the BBC journalist was saying, I really believe.
No, how can you know that I'm not telling the truth, or that I'm saying something that I don't believe in?
And Chomsky replied, I absolutely believe that you're telling the truth, but they would not have chosen you if you believed otherwise.
Yeah. He said, I totally believe that you think that you are telling everything you believe in, or something along the lines of that you believe in what you're saying. But the point is if you believed in anything else, you wouldn't be where you are right now. Exactly. They're cultivated to have these personalities.
So I think that's what's happening. I don't buy into the sort of seeing the Western media as lying, or especially trying consciously to manipulate people so much. I think they genuinely believe it. I think it's for most of them on most topics, they genuinely believe it, but they're also genuinely wrong, right?
For sure.
Yeah, and on China specifically, they've been, and that was my education as well, and probably yours, when we grew up in that environment where communism is bad, and with some racist undertone and so on.
Yeah.
You tend to assume the worst about anything. So immediately, as soon as there is a news coming out of China, you tend to see it under the worst possible angle. You're not. You don't give them the benefit of the doubt on anything.
Yourself are not objective.
Yeah, and I think that's the way those journalists view it often, where they're like, there is this news, it must be that, without,
Yeah, they don't need to fact check because they're like, sounds about right.
Yeah.
It fits their preconceptions.
Yeah.
No, well, that's a really good insight into you and your content. So what's next? More threads? Will you eventually write a book? I know you did a debate once with, Adrian Zenz. I don't know if you'll do more, person-to-person interactions like this. Like, what do you think is next for you?
I mean, if people invite me to do a debate with this or that person, I'm happy to do it. My main life is not Twitter, and I want to keep it that way. I actually think one of the main reasons why I'm quite popular is because it is not my main life. It's because I'm doing this on a purely voluntary basis. So I'm not doing this to earn money, and people, feel that I'm real in that way. If I started to, try to make that my main income source, then I think things will change a lot. So
yeah, and then you become, there's an expectation from your audience, especially if they're supporting you too, where you've got to keep talking even if you don't have anything particular to say at that moment. And I see that with a lot of content where somebody's really good at something, but they feel the pressure to continue talking about things that maybe they're not entirely well versed on. So definitely wouldn't get to that point, and that's good. And I mean, for all the other people who still look at that and don't see that and say, oh, you're a CCP shill, what's really interesting about that is if these people really believed that, if they believed that voices like ours are supported in that way, it would be incredibly easy to debunk our arguments or debunk your analysis, but they don't do that. They go just for the ad hominem. If they were to say, listen, his argument doesn't make sense for this reason, A, B, C, D. It's dishonest for these reasons. And the reason for this dishonesty is because they're probably funded by the Chinese government. That's a valid argument. Sure. That's valid to do that. But they don't do that. They jump over that completely because they can't actually address that. And I think, and so that's why I chose a new strategy where when people say that, I say, well, if that's the case, it should be incredibly easy for you to address what I said if my words are superficially based on only that.
Yeah, it goes back to the famous pyramid of arguments from Paul Graham, from the founder of Y Combinator. Even though he's a guy whose politics I don't appreciate much, his pyramid is pretty good, where the lowest type of argument is A, insult, and B, ad hominem, because it's basically an admission that you can't counter the actual argument and you need to sully the person.
Exactly, exactly. Well, we have been going on, we said we were going to do a 10-minute video, it turned out to be 30 minutes. That probably was expected anyways. I think we should probably catch up with our family, find where they are. But that was a good chat, and I hope everybody enjoyed that and got to see a little bit of the personality behind the epic threads by Arnaud. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.